Hello, my name is Jay Bryce, though it's possible that some viewers may also know me as DJ Mongo from the Lions Den radio show on KUNV Las Vegas, which also podcasts on iTunes and at mongoland.com. I've been a long-time viewer of the Corbett Report, although I've tweeted with James a few times. This is my first question for Corbett. Let me begin by saying that I am a huge fan of the Corbett Report. I am a great admirer of James's work, and not only informative but inspirational. So if my question comes across feeling a bit like cross-examination, then I apologize. Please take it as a philosophical question and not as an attack on you personally, James. My question derives from apparently contradictory philosophical positions put forth in episode 216 of the Corbett Report on the one hand, and a more recent episode of the GRTV Backgrounder Report, Media Lies and Syrians Die, Media Disinformation and the Syrian War, on the other. First, allow me to present the relevant excerpt from episode 216 of the Corbett Report.
The underlying point. And the point is that there is a dangerous idea that has been driven into the public over the past century, and that has demonstrably and consciously been driven into the public's mind by certain connected individuals for certain reasons that we will get into shortly, that there is an ideal of journalistic objectivity to be reached, that somehow there is some ideal in which the conveying of news information can be done in some completely objective sense that has no agenda, ideology, or political persuasion behind it. And it is important to understand that that idea is itself a lie. It is completely and utterly unattainable. It is a myth. So,
to summarize, objectivity, not just journalistic objectivity, but any kind of objectivity, is now recognized to be an impossibility. Or in other words, if anyone pretends to tell you the truth about external reality, they must definitely be telling a lie. And I agree with this. Philosophically, this is because all we really know is our sense impressions. So while there may be a real external reality, a real world out there, we can never have absolute truthful knowledge of it because we are limited by the subjective and limited point of view from which we must perceive that reality, and because whatever that reality is necessarily filtered through our sense impressions, which have a limited range of sensitivity. On top of this, the observer effect of quantum mechanics demonstrates that the very act of observing the world affects the world itself. So not only does choosing what to look for determine in some sense what we'll find, but the act of observing also has a sort of manipulative effect on that external reality, which makes the distinction between objective and subjective itself somewhat misleading. We are part of a continuum with the world we observe, affecting it and being affected by it. So I agree with your position in the myth of journalistic objectivity. The problem comes when we consider your criticism of the work of Ivy Lee and the rise of the corporate government propaganda machine. In the following excerpt, you quote Ivy Lee with disdain, and perhaps rightly so, for intentionally and freely spinning information in order to manipulate public opinion to further a political end.
the architects of our modern system of manufactured consent and official propaganda have long known the importance of the mass media in framing public opinion on any given event. To the pathocrats who blazed the trail toward our modern era of information warfare and opinion control, facts themselves were malleable, subject not to objective reality, but to the way they were perceived and internalized by a credulous public. As Ivy Lee, the man that the Rockefellers hired to invent the modern PR industry after the Ludlow massacre, put it, "It is not the facts alone that strike the popular mind, but the way in which they take place and in which they are published that kindle the imagination. Besides, what is a fact? The effort to state an absolute fact is simply an attempt to give you my interpretation of the facts."
Here I am inclined to agree with you again. The methods by which information is manipulated by the propaganda industry seem insidious and evil. The problem is that while I want to agree with you here, it seems that this view stands at odds with our earlier agreement regarding the myth of objectivity. The problem, as I see it, is that you now assume that there are objective facts, that there is an objective reality, and that there is an objective truth which is being intentionally twisted and manipulated toward evil ends by those corporate and government agents. But what Ivy Lee has to say of objective reality seems all too similar to your own position on objectivity, one that was important enough to you to cause you to dedicate an entire episode of the Corbett Report to it. When Ivy Lee states, besides what is a fact, the effort to state an absolute fact is simply an attempt to give you my interpretation of the facts. He is in fundamental agreement with you when you say, the point is, there is a dangerous idea that has been driven into the public over the past century, that there is an ideal of journalistic objectivity to be reached, that somehow there is some ideal in which the purveying of information can be done in some completely objective sense that has no agenda or ideology or political persuasion behind it. And it is important to understand that that idea is itself a lie. It is completely and utterly unattainable. It is a myth. So it seems like you are in agreement with Ivy Lee on the point that objectivity is a myth, and facts, if they exist at all, are inherently subjective, or at least have a substantial subjective component. So, here's my question, respectfully. How can you chastise Ivy Lee and the propaganda mongerers of the modern state capitalist machine for playing fast and loose with a truth that you acknowledge cannot be objectively harnessed and understood? Is there a difference between acknowledging and being aware of your own subjective bias and attempting to openly present information in light of that bias on the one hand, and being aware of your subjectivity but consciously concealing it while pretending to purvey an absolute truth to the public on the other? And if that is the fundamental distinction between your view and that of the propaganda mongerers, then have you simply forgotten the myth of objectivity when you subsequently presume that there are facts subject to objective reality that are being abused and mishandled by the government and corporate media? Or in other words, why should we not trust the mainstream media and propagandists when they spin the truth, but should trust you when you do it? And if we shouldn't trust you, then why do you bother doing what you do? And once again, I love what you do, so don't take this the wrong way. I'm just trying to sort through this contradiction and give you a chance to clarify my understanding of this apparent conundrum. Thanks.